What exactly does it mean to be a role player in today's NBA? If you're a front office executive for an NBA team, an even more important question is, what is a role player worth? In an era where NBA players are making more money than ever before, where new TV deals pave the way for salary cap spikes, and teams are shelling out payrolls well above salary tax lines to keep their talent, players that we traditionally view as supporting pieces or role players are getting contracts that would have been reserved for only the top 1% of players in the league 10 years ago. And this has led to a lot of these players being called overpaid. But what does it actually mean to be overpaid in the NBA right now? It seems like ever since the new collective bargaining agreement, role players are receiving contracts that seem wild in comparison to what we typically expect a role player's salary to be. 𝙖𝙗𝙤𝙪 Hartenstein, for example, signed a $29 million a year contract with the Oklahoma City Thunder this offseason, and sure enough, there's no shortage of people calling this an overpay. But a little bit more about Hartenstein later. We've grown so accustomed to the $12 million a year role player salaries of the past. The 2-year, $30 million contracts might have been a standard 5 years ago, but the reality is, the landscape of the NBA and how we view the economics of the league have to be fundamentally changed in order to make sense of what is, and more importantly, what isn't an overpay in today's league. And to begin to make that change, let's start by talking about one of the most exciting things there is to talk about, the salary cap. The NBA's salary cap typically follows a year-by-year increase, and since the year 2000, it's gone up at a relatively steady rate. But then something weird happened. In 2016, there was a spike, a really big spike. But what caused this spike? Let's rewind to a time when the NBA and the NBA Players Association were negotiating what would be the new collective bargaining agreement. The NBA had just gotten a nice fat new TV deal, and this meant more money than ever before for the league. You see, the NBA Board of Governors proposed a smoothing of the cap. This would make it to where the influx of money would result in a gradual increase of the cap year over year. The Players Association didn't like that, and instead favored a historic one-time spike. This caused the salary cap to increase by a never-before-seen $24,140,000. This provided teams with, theoretically, more flexibility than ever when it came to signing talent. Let's say that a player was making $25 million during the 2015-2016 season. That would have come out to their contract taking up 35.7% of the salary cap. But if a player was making $25 million the year after, their $25 million a year contract would have only taken up a much more reasonable 26.6% of the salary cap.
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
But all of that was almost 10 years ago. How does it relate to what's happening now? Well, let's return back to that graph. If we follow it forward just a little bit more, the same thing ended up happening for the 2022-23 season. After years of gradual increase, all of a sudden, there was a major jump, an $11.2 million jump. The salary cap was set at $123 million for the 2022-23 season. If that already seems like a crazy amount of increase in a short amount of time, it goes even further than that. For the upcoming 2024-25 season, the salary cap is set at a whopping $140,588,000. In the span of less than 10 years, the salary cap went from $70 million to $140 million. It's doubled. Let's put this into some context using percentage of the salary cap. The player making $25 million a year back in 2016 that was taking up 35.7% of the salary cap would now only be taking up 17.9% of the salary cap next season. This explains some of the why when you're talking about the reasoning behind teams giving out these larger contracts to what would be considered role players. In 2016, 17.9% of the salary cap would have been about $12 million. So if you think about it in that sense, a role player now isn't really making any more than a role player from 9 years ago when you put it into the perspective of percentage of the cap. But I'm going to propose another argument. Not only do I not think that these players are overpaid, I actually think that you can make the argument that they're not getting paid enough relative to the value that you're going to be getting out of them. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope signed a 3-year, $66 million contract with the Magic, which sets him up to earn roughly $22 million a year. Obviously, with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, you get an elite complementary shooter, which is perfect to put around budding superstar Paolo Banchero. But when you factor in the defensive value that he provides, his overall value skyrockets. He's one of the best guard defenders in the league, which is perfect for a defensive-oriented team like Orlando. Considering they're working with a lot of rookie-scale contracts at the moment, and they have a lot of players' bird rights to work with, locking down 3 years of KCP is an extremely smart move. His $22 million a year only takes up 15.7% of the salary cap, which is well below what you'd expect for a player of his value to demand. Nic Claxton is another guy who secured a contract that was eyebrow-raising at first glance. But he's proven that he can make noise in Defensive Player of the Year conversations. He worked well alongside Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden, so you know that he can fit in whatever team you put him on, and he's only 25 years old. His 4-year, $97 million contract carries an average salary of roughly $24 million a year, which is only 17.1% of the salary cap. Considering that most guys making noise in the DPOY race each year are making significantly more than what Claxton will be making, if nothing else, this contract is a bargain for Brooklyn. Now, I want to talk about 𝙖𝙗 Hartenstein. He's kind of been the poster child of role players getting massive contracts this offseason. His deal is for 3 years, $87 million, which carries an average salary of $29 million. This is the first contract where we see a guy like this taking up over 20% of the salary cap. But here's the kicker. In year 1 of his deal, he's going to be making $30 million, which comes out to 21.3% of the salary cap. But the contract is front-loaded, so in year 2, his guaranteed value drops down to $28.5 million, which is projected to only take up 18.4% of the salary cap. The third year is where it gets really interesting, because not only is he projected to only take up 16.8% of the salary cap, but this year is also a team option, which gives OKC even more flexibility. We have to rewind back to that old framework we had of role players getting contracts in that 10 to 15 million a year range. 𝙖𝙗 Hartenstein's contract is going to take up, on average, 18.8% of the salary cap. 18.8% of the salary cap back when the salary cap was $70 million would come out to $13.2 million. So realistically, this is about market value for a player of Hartenstein's caliber. We can pivot over to another Knicks player, OG Anunoby. He's an interesting guy to talk about in this discussion of role player contracts because his contract is significantly bigger than the ones that we've talked about so far. His contract is a massive 5-year, $212.5 million deal, which comes out to him making an average of $42.5 million a year. Considering how much bigger this is than some of these other deals, is it an overpay? Well, this is where it gets interesting. In year 1, his deal will account for 26.1% of the salary cap, which is quite a bit. His contract is backloaded, so he's going to be making $39.6 million in year 2 of his deal, but there's a catch. Because of the salary cap increase, he's projected to be taking up roughly the same amount of the salary cap as he was in year 1 of the contract, despite making more money than he was in the first year of his deal, and that's a trend that will continue throughout the duration of this contract. So even though he will make more and more money as the years go by, he'll still only be taking up right around 25% or less of the salary cap, meaning New York will still have some level of flexibility throughout his time on the team. But even without the nuance of how his contract is structured, I'd argue New York is still more than happy to give him this deal. They're not in a position where they need to worry about paying their stars. They have Jalen Brunson on an incredibly team-friendly deal, and they've got a solid supporting cast and some flexibility depending on how they choose to proceed with Julius Randle. The teams that are giving out these quote-unquote overpays to non-star caliber players are doing it because that's what you do when you're looking to contend for a championship, with the exception of the Brooklyn Nets, of course, with Claxton. But I already explained how Claxton is a guy that can only serve to benefit them long term, regardless of who they bring in. When you have your primary and secondary options, and even your third or fourth options taken care of, then it's time to focus on retaining these supporting pieces. These are the guys that win you championships. Your stars can only do so much, but every championship run, we see time and time again how the role players are the ones that come through consistently and in the biggest moments to help get teams over the hump. In the teams that don't get over that hump, we usually end up talking about their lack of a supporting cast. If you're a general manager and the choice is between winning a championship or saving a few dollars, you take the shot at a championship every time. Really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know this is a little bit different than the film breakdown stuff that I usually do, but let me know what you think in the comments below. If you're new here and you enjoyed this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, leave a like. It helps me out a ton. Regardless, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.